All right. Well, for those I haven't met yet, Nick Leonard. I joined around the same time as Mike. I did not have the sense to also just call this the first 90 days of work items, but I think similar. This has been an open sort of initiative for much longer than I've been working on it. And so I've inherited a lot, had to get up to speed on a lot, and have been kind of working um, to kind of make some of the first iterations of this possible. So we'll talk a little bit today around some of that background, what we're trying to do, and then kind of where we're at right now. And I'm stuck in the basement because I have contractors here. So apologies if you hear really horrible metal grinding in the background. So what is a work item? So work items are essentially an iteration of issues or issue types. I think it actually started out of issue types and kind of realized some of the limitations of that, not to mention the confusion that I think we've all probably experienced of, you mean an issue is both an issue and an issue type. It's the name of the primitive and the type, and it's very confusing from a just information architecture perspective. So relabeling that, I think work items, which exist kind of just as the primitive name as opposed to being a type. And they serve to catalog work to be done. So they are kind of the essential planning object in the future. And they'll be defined by types. So similar to issue types, but not called work item types. And the types will define which widgets are present. So it's essentially a platform or framework that can have multiple different variations or types that each hold different information, which is held by these widgets. So just a little note on terminology. This is a little bit small. Let's see if I have it open here. There's a lot of confusion, I think, within our team working on this in project management. And so I can only imagine for folks who don't see this all the time as to what's a work item type, what's a issue, was the issue issuable, like these terms get thrown around a lot. It took me a while to kind of get up to speed on it. So we made this nice little table of terminology in the work items docs page. So you might, if you start hearing like legacy issue view, we've tried to start using that to refer to anything that's in the current issue view. So like issues today are still in the legacy issue view, as opposed to work items or work item views. Right now, tasks are the only thing that exists as an actual work item. Everything else is still like on the issue model, and is sort of further out to get kind of ported over. But so you'll see these kind of intermixed. Work item specifically kind of means future state, issue or legacy issue view. Basically, the status quo for what exists outside of tasks. So why work item? So I think the biggest part of this is really a bit of a re-architecture that's happening on the back end to bring all these things into standardization. I think right now what we found is that there's a lot of cases where one update actually ends up being 4 updates, because a lot of these things that are built on issues, a lot of the widgets are a bit more piecemeal. So the thing that exists on an epic might not be the same as what exists on the issue, and you're updating things twice. Just, also might mean there's a different user experience between those things in a way that isn't necessarily intended. So I think a lot of the origin of this came out of this effort to streamline those, make it sort of 1 update instead of 5. But then also to provide some greater flexibility, and that's flexibility both I think for us to build new types and offer new functionality, but also potentially for customers. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about what exactly flexibility means, since that could mean kind of a lot. And then easier to adopt. So one of the challenges that we have on project management is that a lot of, especially the bigger enterprise customers, have a very kind of well-established way in which they've tracked their work, and they want to kind of bring that into GitLab, and it's not always easy for them to do that in the current model. So a lot of sort of the extensions that we're adding into work items are to help sort of make that migration possible, allow them to adopt the planning features, and not get kind of stuck with some of the legacy issue roadblocks that they experience today. And all of this is really in order to kind of enhance the planning tool set to become the most popular collaboration tool for knowledge workers in the industry, right? Like that's the planning extension of the overall kind of GitLab, was it the big hairy audacious goal. So flexibility. So flexibility can mean a lot of things. I think in this case, in the near term, it'll mean, like I said, easier tools for GitLab to introduce new features on top of work items. In the long term, it could mean more customer control, to kind of maintain their way of working and manage things. So there's issues out there right now for configurable statuses. So that would mean for an issue right now, an issue can be open or closed, but maybe in the future it could be in progress or ready to release or whatever kind of is useful for them. We already use slightly different statuses for a number of things like incidents and requirements. So it's kind of just, again, kind of making that a standard model that can be used for different work items. Hierarchy is a big component that the product planning team is working on. That's kind of sits on top of work items, and being able to define a flow from epics down to issues, down to tasks, or kind of however they organize their work, and then visualize that in a way that allows them to plan effectively. Workflow, that could be an automation, things like, if you have custom statuses, how do you kind of move things through this process without having to actually manually move everything through the process. And then eventually work item types. We could actually offer the capability with work items in the way that they're built for customers to define their own type. They want to create something that we don't have out of the box, that there may be tools for them to do that. That will never be kind of the default, right? Like it'll always be kind of works out of the box. But we could eventually enable them to do that with the model that's being created, with the goal of allowing customer teams to spend more time managing their work. Right now, a lot of them are kind of managing these workarounds and trying to figure out how to make tools like labels sort of fit, but it's maybe not the experience that they're used to coming from other tools, and it can be a bit of a challenge for them to get up to speed at times. There's a lot here. I'm not going to read all of this, but feel free to on your own. These are just some UX principles I came up with, basically taking the general GitLab design principles and just trying to think through, like, how would I apply these to work items, and like what are some of the work item specific experience goals that were defined. Some of them were defined before I started, but kind of looking at those, taking the pieces that I thought were kind of meaningful, and trying to come up with a set of things that I would think define sort of an ideal outcome. So a couple that I'll just highlight here. One is collaborating in real time. So the more we can get to that sort of feeling of real-time collaboration, the better. And as part of that, sort of shortening the context to action flow. So why do you use work items? It's typically to convey some sort of context as something that needs to be done. And that's going to be continually updated as the work gets done, both by you, but also by the other people in your team. So whether you're coming to something for the first time and understanding, oh, there's a thing to do, or you're coming to it for the 100th time and trying to catch up on all the updates that have been made, how quickly can we allow you to see what's going on, update something if you need to, and kind of do the work that you need to do. The last one I'll note here is just iterating from familiarity. Again, we have a lot of customers in the space that are kind of ingrained in some of the tools that they use, and are trying to migrate over. So as much as we can, we're trying to build from like the pieces that we like or the customers like, that we want to kind of enable them to utilize here, and then build from that and improve upon it. So the first iteration of work items is tasks. This is the smallest form of work to be done. You can think of it as a child of issues that actually will be kind of the hierarchy that is set by default. And right now, in other products, they might utilize this as like a sub issue or sometimes a task. In GitLab today, these are represented either as like a linked issue or a related issue, or like a checklist item, which means that they're kind of, again, those are kind of ways to manage this, but they're not exactly like trying to solve this goal. It's a bit of a workaround. You might have a related issue just because somebody tagged it in the comments and it's not actually like a sub issue of that work item. And your checklist items, you could put whatever you want in there. So this is more of a sort of first class way to solve this. Why start with tasks? So tasks, well, one thing is they use entirely reusable widgets. There's nothing, at least right now, that we're thinking of for tasks that are only going to exist in tasks, which means that everything we build for tasks will then sort of be ported into other work items, things like statuses, things like weight, things like assignees. And then it also extends this concept of hierarchy beyond epics to actually kind of showcase some of what's coming in the future. So again, that whole model of epics to issues to tasks, I think you'll be able to start seeing that a bit more clearly with some of the components that are coming out alongside tasks and with tasks as kind of a representative object of that hierarchy. And then it enables rapid iteration without disrupting high volume existing features. Like rather than starting with let's rebuild issues as work items, it's like, great, the 50,000 issues that exist on GitLab are suddenly going to look and feel a lot different. We start with something that doesn't exist today that can kind of provide a lower risk way to test, see how people use it, learn from the model, and then build out some of that architecture behind the scenes that's going to support everything else, and we can test that, validate it, and make sure it all works correctly before hitting some of those higher volume, higher risk kind of objects. So right now this is out there behind a feature flag, the work items feature flag. It is live on gitlab.org, so you can use it if you want to. I'll show you how to do that in a second. I think right now we're targeting this for 15.2, pending some cleanup work that we need to get done. And I think potentially alongside the kind of first iteration of that hierarchy component that the product planning team's working on. So again, you'll be able to kind of see those relationships. There's a lot of additional widgets in development and some work on the next type. So the next work item type would be requirements, and so that would be one that actually exists today, getting moved into the work items framework. And then a lot of kind of work kind of happening around work items just in validation. So looking at tasks, how are tasks used, what sort of feedback can we get from tasks, building out primary workflows. So this create a checklist item, then create a task is not really the long-term primary workflow. It's kind of a short-term way to do this. Eventually, you would be able to actually create and manage tasks and all their work items through more standard list views, moving into creation flows and things like that. We started with the checklist item, I believe, just to again sort of isolate that feature without having to sort of try to embed it into this legacy process. And all of that's still kind of in progress. So maybe expect some further updates in later showcases. Okay, so let's take a look at a task real quick. So I just have a checklist here in this issue. A couple of these have already been converted to a task. So I can open this. It opens in the modal view right now. I can come in here and change this sort of directly. So that's shortening the context to action workflow. Again, it's like trying to make everything sort of as easy as possible just to edit. So I've changed my title. I can change my status. Right now it's just open and close because we haven't really built the full status components out yet. And I have a description that I can edit and change. I think eventually in later iterations, we would like this to also sort of be more directly editable. There's a bit more limitations there, but that's kind of where this is going. If you want to create your own, you just create a checklist item like this, hit this little icon here, and it will convert that into a task, or I should say rather, it'll create a task from that checklist item, and then you can see that here and reopen it. there's not like a direct connection between these for various reasons that get super complicated as to like, if I check this, does it change the status and things like that. I think that will be more clear as we build out those primary workflows. And then one last sort of note, so that's tasks as they exist today. Just starting to think through like, what does this mean for other things? This is a bit more of a vision for sort of that real-time collaboration. There's some work happening in another single engineering group around like real-time collaboration and issue editing. So like, what does it all look like when we put these things together and think about sort of real-time collaboration? If you had an issue in the work items model where you could actually see, who's working on it, what are they working on, be able to see extending sort of the widget model from both widgets that are more like fields. So this is primarily what we're working on right now with just updating data, but actually thinking about like more interactive widgets like, a planning poker sort of app that can live within the work item and could be reused in different places for different reasons. All those pieces sort of coming together. That's a ways off, but that's kind of the direction in which we're heading. I think that is all I had right now, but I am happy to take questions.
Awesome. I had the first question. I was curious if you could give us a sense of what scenario would cause a user to attach a task to an issue rather than attaching an issue to an epic or a sub-epic.
Yeah, it's really kind of up to the teams and how they want to break it down. But I think if you have the epic as sort of the feature level, like what are we trying to do, and then the issue might be broken down into different tasks or different sort of activities for different teams to do. Those could then get broken down even further. So you could have an issue that might be I don't know, add assignees to tasks, and you could have tasks from there that could be broken down by maybe the discipline. So you could have a task for design the assignees thing, and then a task for build the endpoint for assigning a assignee. That kind of get divvied out at that more granular level. That's kind of one way we expect teams to use this. You could also use that for even more granular. So one of your issue could be validation research for your assignees, and then your task could be schedule people by this date and build a session guide by this date, and you can sort of track the progress as opposed to right now where you would probably have to create just like checklist items where you don't have a discrete due date, you don't have discrete assignees. You're kind of just doing that in the markdown. This would allow you to kind of bring that into a more trackable and reportable way.
I believe, Valerie, you have the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Blair. Can you describe the experience perspective or point of view? So in the slide where you talk about, this is why we're starting with tasks, I heard more about this is technically feasible, it's lower risk. What is your perspective on the actual user experience? Why are we starting here, and why does it make sense for the user?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think there's a number of customers that are looking to get to this level of more granular planning. So hopefully it'll enable them to kind of plan their work. But I think also in terms of just the different sort of UX present for tasks, it's just a way that we can test that out and see like, the whole model of opening a task from a issue and having it appear in a modal is fairly different and not something that exists elsewhere right now. So it's something that we're able to present to the user, allow them to kind of get that context of, okay, this is a task that lives within this issue without having to navigate back and forth or open, like, on a customer call I was on the other day, like talking about, how many tabs they have open at any given time, and kind of see like, does this actually solve and start to solve that problem? Are they able to use this in a way that addresses some of these pain points that they're experiencing today around just having to open so many things to get to context?
have a quick follow-up question. So there are other work items. I guess I'm still struggling to understand why we started with tasks versus the other options that are available in work items, the other types. I'm probably screwing up I don't have the little cheat sheet up right now.
No, I think work item types would be right. My understanding is in terms of task, it's just, again, because it's new and it's something that we can sort of test in a bit more of an isolated fashion, that we're able to both build something that provides new value, as well as kind of test some of the patterns and architecture that needs to exist for other things. I think in terms of the UX, it's more about not making like the bigger disruption to something like issues or epics that are being used sort of regularly all the time today, and get something out there that we can get feedback on.
I believe, Jeremy, you have the next question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this, Nick. I was just curious. I know we've had some conversation about this in I think one of the MRs or issues, but just the consideration for inline editing with consideration for accessibility, and just in regards to the rest of the product, when we're introducing a pattern like that would make this experience maybe just inconsistent in the way that in some places maybe it is editable, and in other places you go to another, to an issue or elsewhere, and it's not. How are you thinking about that and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a good consideration. I think consistency in the experience is probably our most aware problem that we're going to face in the short term, because especially with tasks being the only work item, how do we test some of the things that we want to look at from a work item perspective, but in that sort of more isolated view without having to build every other type? It does kind of lead to the fact that tasks look and feel different from the rest of the UI, and even from other things that will eventually be work items like an issue. So something that I think is a short-term issue, and as we learn from tasks and get feedback on there, and build out the additional work item types, it'll close some of those gaps, as other work items become more consistent with the work item experience. Those will become more consistent with internally to work items. I think as we learn from the experience of tasks and build those patterns out, I think that's kind of where it would really behoove us to kind of see what's the relationship to not just work items, but to the entire sort of product experience, and where do we need to either standardize or bring things into other parts of the product, or where are there opportunities to kind of feed things back from work items to the product at large. I think accessibility is definitely something that we want to continue iterating on, and making sure that this is fast and easy to use for everybody, and regardless of kind of how they're coming to this.
Blair, should we continue with questions? I wasn't sure how much time you wanted to leave for Sasha.
Sasha's talk in particular is a lightning talk, so I think we got a few minutes to maybe do your question or Marcel's question, however you guys want to dole that out. One more question, I think.
Marcel, you want to go? Since mine can be async if needed. It's okay.
Sure. I didn't fully complete it yet, so I'm just going to do it a bit more sync. From the existing types of work items, we have issues, incidents, requirements, and test cases. The vast majority of users only uses issues. Have you already thought about how to deal with the extra complexity that we're going to put on these users, where it's just one issue or one work item type that they are mostly using? And how will we make sure that the experience stays as simple and easy as possible for these kinds of users?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it definitely could introduce some additional complexity. I think we'd want to manage that by basically making smart defaults. Much like today, most people use issues like, can we just default in most cases to, creating an issue while giving them some more of that context around sort of what those other types are and sort of how they would use it. So if they want to extend their usage, they could, or they could just continue using issues as they use today. I think we'll want to avoid kind of anything where we're forcing people to make choices at every step, that we're enabling them to basically just use it as default, and if that's how they want to operate, or if they decide as a team, okay, we see the value of how we can sort of utilize these different objects in different ways, and then they can sort of define how they decide to use those.
Cool, thanks.
Great. I am going to